Continuing on now with the 1920s, part 3. Sorry if the numbering is confusing because there's part 1, part 1A, part 2, and now part 3. Okay, we're still on the Red Scare. This should, I hope, finish that. I didn't know I was going to go 4 of these. But the attempted bombing of the Attorney General's house, Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer, a progressive with impeccable credentials, the Red Scare acquired a leader and a definer. The news coverage of the bombing put the Attorney General on the front page of newspapers all across the country, and it went to his head. He began to envision the glittering prize of the Democratic Party's presidential nomination the following year, 1920. So he tries to keep himself in the headlines. He solemnly informed the public that America was under a kind of radical internal siege and that the red takeover could happen at any time. We have to be very vigilant. There's something there that you should, if you're going to live in this country, you should be aware of. There are politicians who take every opportunity to rattle our cages, to keep us scared. Because when we're scared, we will line up, snap a salute, and we'll obey orders, which is what they want. Because ultimately at the bottom, almost, maybe not quite, but almost all politicians desire power. So I've been watching this for a long time. It seems like, according to them, we just stagger from one crisis to another, every crisis being another opportunity to augment the power of government. And beware, when the government gets new powers, like what we've done in the last 7 or 8 months with this pandemic, they've relinquished those powers very grudgingly. So look to come out of this with a grotesquely over-empowered government, as if it were not already overly overpowered, grotesquely overpowered. Okay, so Palmer, as Attorney General, had at his disposal the resources of a federal law enforcement agency now known as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It had only been set up a few years earlier, and prior to that, there were only like a couple of federal law enforcement agencies, and they had very specific tasks. You had the Secret Service, the original task there. It was part of the Treasury Department. They're supposed to catch smugglers. Later, they acquired the job of protecting the president and other high officials. And you had what is now known as the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and that was that. Almost all the criminal law was state law, and the states had their own enforcement agencies. But here's what's going to be the FBI. And on 2 occasions, one in, I think, December, late 1919, not sure the month, and again 2-3 months later, Palmer sent out agents of the FBI on surprise raids of Socialist Party headquarters in cities all across the land. Now remember, being a socialist is not a crime. Socialists weren't trying to hide. They weren't trying to pass themselves off as something else. They were out there. They had their party headquarters, so FBI agents would show up and basically ransack the place, confiscate membership rolls, donor lists, anything like that, and just simply arrest anybody that happened to be thereabouts and hold them without charge, sometimes for over a week, occasionally under really, really uncomfortable conditions. I think there was one time when there were a big bunch of people just crowded into a basement hallway that had 3 inches of cold water on the floor and not even a place to sit down, and they held them there for days. Now, technically, you're not supposed, law enforcement at any level is not supposed to hold someone more than a certain amount of time without charging them with a crime. Okay? That's why if you're being held without a charge, you lawyer up, and the lawyer goes to a judge and asks what's called a writ of habeas corpus. And that's a requirement that the prosecution present a charge against you. If they can't, they got to let you go then and there. Okay. Being a socialist was unpopular, but it was not a crime. So it amazes me, and it's happened again and again and again. We are sometimes so afraid that radical alien enemies will take away our freedoms that we hasten to take our own freedoms away first before they get a chance. Just looks that way to me. All right, these are known as the Palmer raids. So the public is extremely edgy. Vigilantism takes control. All the anti-German sentiment coming out of World War II has now refocused its attention on a whole new set of scapegoats. Anybody foreign born, anybody like Southern Europeans, anybody whose last name begins with a vowel, anybody known to harbor socialist sentiments or anarchism or communism, or maybe you just look a little bit out of line. Okay, if you dare vary from what you're supposed to think, then bad things could happen. You know, your friends would shun you, you lose your job, your wife divorces you, and your kids change their names. Some crazy stuff happened. This is mass hysteria. There was a case involving, they're having a horse race somewhere up in Indiana. There's a horse track, horse races going on. And between the horse races, this man named Frank Petroni stood up and just shouted out for everybody to hear. He says, "To hell with the United States." Well, another race patron a few rows behind him took exception to that, pulled out a pistol, and just shot Petroni dead right there in front of several hundred people. Case went to trial, and the shooter was acquitted by the jury after 3 minutes deliberation. Okay? The Chief of Staff of the United States Army publicly expressed agreement with a sentiment first stated by some popular speaker or evangelist of the era that said that what he would do with these ornery, wild-eyed socialists and IWWs, that's the Wobblies, would be stand them up for a firing squad and save space on our ships. There was another famous quote there. The Chief of Staff was Leonard Wood, General Leonard Wood. I think there's a hospital named after him. And he agreed with an evangelist, probably Billy Sunday, said that what he proposed deporting these alleged radicals, quote, in ships of stone with sails of lead, with the wrath of God for a breeze and hell for the first port. Ooh. So things are crazy. Congress expelled 5 duly elected members of the House of Representatives because they were socialists when they had actually run for and campaigned as socialists and got elected. Okay, what rule says to do that? I think there was a prominent socialist of the era named Victor Berger who got expelled, and then he won a special election to fill his own seat and got expelled again. So things are crazy. Several hundred Russian-born American citizens who happened to be socialists or perhaps communists were deported. They put them on a ship, sent them over to the newly established Soviet Union, and just dumped them out with no hint of due process. These were American citizens. They had not been charged with, let alone convicted of, any crime, because being a socialist or a communist was not a crime. So that's kind of the low point. The most famous deportee was a woman named Emma Goldman, who was a really, really hardline radical. Okay, by the spring of 1920s, where I was, this is kind of beginning to lose its steam. Okay, when people are panic-stricken that some catastrophe is about to happen and about to happen and about to happen, and it just keeps on not happening, people are going to start to lose interest. Okay, and the Secretary of the Interior, a man named Louis Post, somehow in the chain of command, that official had to approve of any deportations, and he publicly announced he wasn't going to do that anymore. So here's the Attorney General, who sees that the horse is staggering to its knees under him before he gets to the finish line. He's thinking he can ride this all the way to the Democratic nomination. So Attorney General Palmer's got to do something to get this going again. So he announced the date when the communist rising would occur. And people just got to sit back and sort of wait to see what's going to happen. The date Palmer picked was not an irrational choice. It was May 1st, 1920. Okay? May 1st is in much of the world called May Day, and May Day is the high holy day, Christmas and Easter rolled into one for communists and socialists around the world. We happen to be one of the few, if not the only countries in the world that observes a Labor Day on any date other than May 1st. And if somebody wants to change it to May 1st, they just announced what their affiliations are. All right, so May Day finally, May 1st came, May 1st went. No communist rising, nothing like that. Any socialists who were left were not in jail. We get together down at the park and hand out some socialist literature and listen to some socialist speakers and eat some socialist sandwiches and drink some socialist beer and go home. There was no attempt to overthrow the government. And after that, I wouldn't say it just popped like a bubble, but it got a lot harder to take this seriously. It's not that we weren't concerned about the communists anymore. We'd never really back off from that, nor should we. What goes away is this heart in your throat, heart-pounding fear that it's going to happen. Has it happened yet? Has it happened yet? Everybody looking at their watch all the time. So eventually, late summer 1920, after it's calmed down quite a bit, the serious act of terrorism, somebody set off a truck bomb on Wall Street in New York City at rush hour. It was a truck loaded with explosives, and it killed 38 people, injured several hundred more. There's a building there that still has the pockmarks from that truck bomb, and nobody to this day knows who did it. But it does fit the alleged profile of anarchists, communists, and so forth. Because, Wall Street symbolizes capitalism. That makes sense. So even that shock treatment did not revive the corpse of the Red Scare. So there's more to the story, but we're going to get to it later. Next, we're going to turn our attention to I believe it's the Consumer Society. So I'll get there then. We'll cut this one off now.